Welcome to Working on Your Family Business. Create a Plan for Success. This webinar is provided by the Ahola Corporation, Ease at Work, and the Coughlin Group as a part of our unique service offerings through our Family Business Employee Assistance Program. In fact, we have 2 additional workshops planned for this calendar year. This webinar will be 1 hour in length and include a slide presentation, 3 audience participation polls, and a worksheet, which is available for download via the link on your screen. Throughout the presentation, we also encourage listeners to submit questions to our presenters via the Q&A function of Zoom. This webinar is being recorded and it will be emailed to all registrants with the presentation slides and worksheet reference. Now to the introductions. My name is Lori Slush, Strategic Planning Director for the Ahola Corporation, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to our program presenters today. Our first presenter is Sonia Ahola. Sonia is responsible for communications and brand strategy for the Ahola Corporation. Sonia is a 3rd generation Ahola family member who recently joined the family business after working externally in e-commerce sales analytics. Sonia has shifted the company's focus to support social media, rich media content, and mobile-enabled assets. Sonia earned her bachelor's degree in business administration with a specialization in marketing from The Ohio State University. Our second presenter is Jeannie Coughlin. Jeannie provides smart business planning that is practical, profitable, and personal. She is a graduate of the Peter Drucker Leader to Leader Institute, is certified in stages of growth strategist and professional behavior and values analyst. Jeannie received the Featured Book Award from the Harvard Working Knowledge Group for her book, The Rise of Women Entrepreneurs, People, Process, and Global Trends. Jeannie is also chair of the Cleveland chapter of WPO, the Women's Presidents Organization, which is a peer advisory group serving women-led multi-million-dollar companies. And with that, I'll turn the webinar over to Jeannie and Sonia.
Okay, well, thank you, Lori. Let's go ahead and get started. As you can see, we've got the agenda for the webinar on the screen. We're going to start with asking the maybe somewhat rhetorical sounding question of, do I really need to create a business plan? And then we'll learn a new way of looking at the planning process. And that will take us into the 5 questions you need to answer. And perhaps most importantly, making it stick. It's a process, not an event. As Lori said, we'll have time at the end for questions, so please do submit those as they come up. Our discussion today is going to be a combination of how-to, best practices, and real-life application. So let's begin with, do I really need a business plan? For many family businesses, it's the connection with family that drives the motivation for growth and prosperity. And this can be an advantage when it comes to planning, since often they have that long-term outlook because of that motivation to create a legacy for the next generation. But it's also true that many family businesses lack the formal planning process that other companies may embrace. They sometimes assume the personal nature of the family and those relationships enable them to figure it out as they go. But creating a plan is actually more critical to the future of a family business. As you can see on this slide, just 30% continue into the 2nd generation, 12% are viable into the 3rd, and only 3% survive to the 4th generation and beyond. And one of the things that we know is that disagreements in family businesses often arise from a lack of clarity between family members and poor communication. And this can be especially pronounced when there are multiple generations involved, each with a different idea of what they're building or the best way to get there. So when I ask people why they think they should plan, I usually hear things like to create budgets, to guide our decision making, to get everybody on the same page. And I think everybody knows they should have a plan, and yet we know many do not. And so I'd like to suggest that we look at a different answer for this question. I'd like to propose that the most important reason we need to plan is to change behaviors. We're going to talk more about changing behaviors throughout the webinar today, but first let's pause for a moment to check in with all of you. So Lori, I'm going to turn it over to you for our first poll.
Thanks, Jeannie. So please take a moment to answer the following question. Do you have a written plan for your business? Yes, no, or not sure?
Okay, this is going to be revealing. And the votes are coming in. And we're gonna, one more second, close that out.
All right, so 5% said yes, 5% said no, and 27% said not sure. Jeannie, what do you think of that?
I don't know. That's not sure how that doesn't add 100 to 100%, Lori. Wonder if we've got a problem with our poll. Okay, folks, well, stay tuned. We'll work on that. Okay, so let's get back to the planning discussion. So let's look at the wisdom of IMPay to set the stage for our planning. You must simplify. You must make the complex simple, and then you must make it work. One of the biggest challenges people experience when they start the planning process is the feeling of being overwhelmed and intimidated. And people tell me that creating a plan can feel a bit like writing a term paper in school. And really, how many of us enjoy that process? And the other thing people tell me is that planning terms can be confusing, and the meaning of planning terms aren't universally understood. But business planning, as we're going to talk about today, doesn't need to be overwhelming. We just need to be able to take something that's complicated, granted, but understand it and communicate it in a simple way. So Sonia, what would you say has been the biggest planning obstacle for the AHOLA team?
I think it was most difficult for our team to really step away from the day-to-day operations that we all know can take over. So our family business is run by 4 siblings. So they each operate a separate division of the company. And before I entered the business, my father and his siblings managed the day-to-day operations through each of those areas. But they didn't meet regularly as owners to talk about strategy. They really used meetings to talk about, fixing immediate issues on an as-needed basis or discussing large-scale projects. So, they were reactive, not proactive. And I think, like you noted, that's pretty common. So fortunately, they did recognize that, this wasn't a strength for them, and they needed to really bring someone in to work on the business and as they were working in the business. So they hired Lori, our strategic planner, and then they also created an advisory board.
Well, that's great. So your family has really come a long way in your approach to planning, and you're fortunate to have Lori on board.
Yes, absolutely.
It's interesting that your family's early experience is consistent with what I hear from a lot of other family businesses where different family members sort of have their thing, and a lot of times they sort of inherit that because there's nobody else there to do it.
Right.
But they're not necessarily coordinated.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lori. Or Sonia, excuse me. Okay, so moving on. So what we need is a new way of looking at the planning process. And today we're going to learn about CG1, which is a methodology for planning that gets the entire management team moving in one direction with one vision and working from one plan. So CG1 is made up of 3 steps: creating clarity, focusing behaviors, and measuring results. Clarity feels good, and it serves the very important purpose of getting everyone in the family on the same page. And not surprisingly, it's important to non-family members too, because it increases their engagement and it prevents the plan from becoming a family secret, if you will. So this clarity from step 1 drives the next step, which is focusing behaviors. And as we discussed earlier, the focusing behaviors is critical to help guide the day-to-day decisions that individuals make about how to spend their time. And then finally, to successfully execute the plan and see changes in the business, we've got to measure results and evaluate whether people are actually changing habits that will produce those desired outcomes. Okay, so let's look at the 5 questions that make up the CG1 planning process. And they are on the screen here. So the first is, why does this company exist? And what are our core values? What are we building? How will we grow this over time? What are the game-changing projects? And what should we measure? At this point, you may want to follow along on the worksheet that was provided to you. And you can either jot down notes or even begin, capturing some thoughts for your plan. And we're going to go through each of these questions so we can understand their purpose and how to answer them. Okay, so the first question is, why does your company exist? And what are your core values? To identify your why, think about how you would describe your company's purpose. That might be how you help others and what value the company brings. Simon Sinek does a really good job of explaining the importance of being able to communicate your why in his popular TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action. And you can easily find that talk by Googling the name, and I believe it's one of the most popular TED Talks out there. Along with answering the why question, family members need to identify the values that tie the why and the family together. But this connection to values and the influence on the culture is part of what can make a family business culture so rich. So Sonia, how would you answer this question for the Ahola Corporation? Why does it exist?
I thought about it, and the Ahola Corporation exists to serve other family businesses by helping them perpetuate their legacy. So that's really our vision and our mission kind of combined, is how do we serve other family businesses to help them pass it on to the future generation. So by us also being a family business, we do this for ourselves, and we get to reap the benefits of that also. So by helping other family businesses, we're also perpetuating our family legacy.
Well, that's great, and it really comes through in your business and the people who work here. So did you guys include your company values, and how did you determine what those should be?
So I talked a little bit about our family and how there are 4 siblings that kind of manage our business. So we determined our company values through each of those 4 siblings who are our 4 owners. So they each shared a core value that they thought represented them and represented what they bring to the organization. So, it's a little bit more authentic. It's really a legacy for them, and it's a fun story to tell because they can see, our values on the wall, and it represents them. So those 4 are specifically teamwork, perseverance, innovation, and resourcefulness.
Okay, well, wow, that's cool. Thanks for sharing that, Sonia. I really like the way that you guys approached the values discussion and, everybody contributing sort of their perspective.
Right.
It's really key that everybody, not just in the family, but also in the company for that matter, know those core values. And I feel like a lot of leaders don't spend time on this because they think that it's less important or maybe the more esoteric part of the plan, but it really does bring it to life. And as you said, sharing it with the employees is so key. Okay, thank you. All right, so let's move on to the second question that the leadership team needs to answer, which is, what are we building? So in other words, if you think about, if I had a crystal ball and I could see 3 to 5 years into the future, how would the business look? How would I describe it? So think about how it would look in terms of size and geographic scope, number of employees. Will there be new markets or product offerings in the picture? It's interesting, I find that many business owners do already have a clear picture of that preferred future. And they really don't need a drawn out planning exercise to figure it out. But I also find that most of the time that vision isn't written down. But the reality is Whether I'm clear or confused, I always take a group of people with me. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather have clear. So here's a challenge for each of you listening today. At the end of the webinar, go and ask 3 people in your organization if they know what the future vision of the company is, and see what kind of response you get. In fact, at this point, you can see we've got the poll up. So let's turn it over to Lori for the next poll question so we can see how you predict that turning out.
Great. Please take a moment and give your best guess to the answer to this question. And I will make sure that I read the percentages properly. That'll be my clarity. So what percentage of your management team do you think knows the future vision of your company? Do you think it's 0%, maybe 1 to 25, maybe 26 to 50, 51 to 75, or 76 to 100%? This is of your management team. Let's see.
Okay, so the votes are coming in, and it's pretty spread out there. What are the results, Lori?
Well, interestingly, it looks like most of you chose 51 to 75%, but there's also a balance of folks in the 1 to 50 range.
Okay, well, I was real curious to see what we would get on this question today, because now it may be that our participants are, because they're here today joining a webinar on planning, are doing a better job in their organizations at communicating.
Absolutely, forward thinking.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, good. Well, thank you all for participating in the poll. Okay, so let's get back to the planning framework. The third question in our plan is, how will we build this over time? And this does start to feel more like planning since it's action-oriented. So when you think about answering this question, your answers should be high-level and future-oriented and directional, as they'll guide the creation of the subsequent sections of the plan. So think about those big ideas that will guide your business over the next 3 to 5 years. These should connect the dots between where you are now, your current reality, and the future vision you have for your company. A well-known planning concept called the balanced scorecard provides a useful approach for helping you answer this question. It has you look at your company from a variety of perspectives, including financial, sales and service, operations, and the learning and growth of the team. So on this next slide, we've provided some examples of strategy statements. In this case, it's for a manufacturing company. And you can see the first example on the list is focus on new markets by expanding our dealer network globally. So this strategy is high level and it's future oriented, and you'll notice it doesn't specify dates or measurements because those come later in the plan. So think of these strategy statements as the overarching ideas that set the tone and inform the rest of the plan. As you can see, as you read through the list that we've included, we've got strategies related to marketing and sales, operations, and HR. So again, we're making sure that we're looking at the business from several different angles. So Sonia, I'm curious, what kinds of exercises does the AHOLA team use to identify your strategies for growth?
Well, it's interesting that you said that, Jeannie, about the angles. So we really take that to heart and we try and have a really holistic perspective. So we typically start with a SWOT analysis where we examine strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but we really want to look at it from a 360-degree perspective. So, we'll survey our clients and we'll survey our employees. We'll, reach out to our key partnerships and our trusted advisors to really get a holistic understanding of what strategies make sense and what should we move on, and then when should we move on it.
That's great. So you're really, it sounds like getting a great diversity of perspectives and ideas. And I like that you get the customer feedback as well.
Yeah, that's been a great insight for us too.
That's great, that voice of the customer. Many of the clients that I work with also use the SWOT tool. I think that's a good classic planning exercise to get your process started. And if anybody on the webinar is new to that concept, there are a lot of resources online, including worksheets that you can use with your team. Okay, so once you've generated a list of high-level strategies, the fourth question you need to answer is, what are the important projects or initiatives that flow from those strategies and will take the business to the next level? These game-changing initiatives, if you will, are key to connecting the strategies to implementation. So if we take the example of the first strategy, which was on the prior slide, that was to focus on new markets by expanding our dealer network globally. Now we need to decide how and when we're going to do that. And so we need to turn that strategy into one or perhaps several projects that we'll focus on over the coming year. So the game changers are projects that flow from your strategies, and they build capacity in your business and help take it to the next level. So if you think about, these are usually projects that have a beginning and an end, rather than some ongoing activity, if you will, that's part of regular operations. And it's ironic that most companies can operate just fine day to day and sometimes even grow without implementing these game changers. But usually the sustainable growth of a company requires an investment in those capacity building projects. For many people, the big game changer project has a pile dedicated to it on the corner of the desk, but there's just never enough time to get to it. So, Lori, let's stop now and take another poll to understand our audience's experience with game changers.
Yeah, so here's our last question for the audience, and it's based on the number of company initiatives. So how many game-changing initiatives does your company typically have in a year? We'll take a moment to answer that question. Is it 0 to 3, 4 to 6, maybe 7 to 10, or even 11 or more? That'd be a lot, wouldn't it?
It is, and it's interesting. I think we all are always so optimistic about what we can get done in a year. I tend to see companies being overloaded with game changers, but this group, this looks like they're having some discipline around choosing their game changers.
Yeah. All right. So the majority of you are saying 0 to 3. And then 4 to 6 is the next one, and then 7 to 10, a few, and I'm glad we don't see any 11 or more.
That's good. That's right. They'd be collapsing under the weight of their game changers. All right, good. Well, thanks everybody. Very interesting to know what's happening in other companies. Okay, so the next step, once the game changers have been identified, is to prioritize them. And we know that a big frustration in planning is a lack of execution. And often that's due to overloading the team with too many priorities. So it's important to spread out the game-changing projects. And in fact, some companies identify just one big game changer for each quarter of the year. And perhaps that's how some of our participants are approaching that. This is good because it helps the team from becoming overwhelmed and taking on too much, too fast, and then, losing all initiatives because they feel just overwhelmed. So Sonia, how does the team at AHOLA determine what new projects or initiatives you're going to focus on in the coming year?
Well, it's harder now to be focused because there's so much opportunity, there's so many things going on, and we have to actively be very diligent in saying no than saying yes. And there's some people in the organization that want to say yes, 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 and to Jeannie's point, it's sometimes unachievable and overwhelming. So we do have to be very diligent in saying no. So in 2017, just recently, our executive team and our advisory board, they developed a strategic plan. So, 1 year, 3-year snapshot, and a 10-year kind of overall directional forecast. So those key things roll back into 90-day objectives for everyone. So to your point again about making sure, what are we doing day to day, and is that contributing to where we want to be? So, we just recently put that in place in January of this year. So, like I hinted at earlier, we were seeing this lack of accountability and how do we really create this great plan for us. So we're happy to have that ready to go and we can reference it now.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you've really done a good job of, that saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Right.
You're really breaking it down into incremental steps so it's not overwhelming, because I do think that feeling of being overwhelmed really gets in the way of planning for a lot of companies. And you also hit on a key point about having to say no. And I don't know if you've heard that saying that when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
Right.
So that's another exercise I've seen teams do, where it's the power of no. They go through and identify what are the things that we should stop doing. So sometimes that's as important as figuring out what
absolutely.
to start. Yeah. Okay, so we're coming into the home stretch now with the fifth question that we need to answer, which is, what should we measure? So to answer this question, you want to ask yourself, what are the activities or the day-to-day habits that need to happen for us to be successful? And what are the metrics that will reveal progress? So key metrics could be leading indicators, and that might be something like the number of meetings with potential customers, or they could be lagging indicators such as on-time deliveries, or even really, if you think about it, sales results are a lagging indicator. And again, you can use that framework of the balanced scorecard to help you generate ideas in all areas of the business and make sure you're covering all those bases. A lot of times when people think about measurement, they think about purely financial metrics. So I would challenge you to think beyond those usual quote unquote business metrics and consider activities or habits related to things like perhaps building a sense of team or improving communication. Or for you personally as a leader, what are those habits that you want to have that you think will make you more effective? It can be those small things done consistently well that make a significant difference. I always like to remember that the future of our business, and really of our lives for that matter, will be dictated by those accumulated choices that we make on a day-to-day basis. Those really do add up to, the results that we've got. So Sonia, does your management team track metrics? I'm sure you do, the way you described your planning process. Are there any unique activities or results that you track?
So I hit on it a little bit earlier. So we do company, department, and individual MBOs, or management by objective, to confirm that those daily, weekly, monthly activities are actually getting us results. So, for example, I don't think this is too unique, but the way that we look at it may be considered unique. So we track, how many touch points we have with a client in a certain period of time. So we like to look at the culmination of those activities. So in total, how many calls, emails, in-person meetings, that way we're looking at it holistically. So, we think that we can tie client retention, sales opportunities, and then overall customer experience to that kind of total scope of those activities.
Well, that's great. And I think the point that you made, that you can connect results to those activities, is key to keep you motivated about tracking them.
Right.
I think sometimes organizations think something will be great to track and measure, and either it doesn't really tell them anything, it doesn't inform their decision making, and or it just takes so much time to collect the data.
Right.
That it becomes onerous. I kind of have a rule of thumb that if it takes you more than an hour a month to collect the metrics for that month, then it's too much work.
Too tedious.
Too tedious, exactly. So, and I also would say, again, measuring even simple things, like for instance, a weekly meeting with your direct reports, reinforces the importance of that. And those are the kinds of meetings that tend to get canceled. But when you measure it, it highlights it and makes it more important.
Right.
Okay. All right, well, this next slide expresses a sentiment that's near and dear to my heart, which is your next level of success will require the next level of discipline. And you might recall the invitation for this event promised that we'd share the 2 key drivers for a successful plan. And they are discipline in tracking the plan and discipline in communicating about the plan. A mistake I frequently see teams make in the planning process is pausing too long after they create their plan. And some of you may have felt this yourself. You're so relieved when the planning process is over that the ball is dropped on this next phase, which is implementing that next level of discipline. So, it's true that having a process in place to discuss the plan won't ensure that everything gets done, but it will help to maintain realistic expectations and keep those communication channels open. And having that consistent discipline meeting rhythm creates productive tension, which is a good thing, around the topic of performance and results. So Sonia, how often does the team at AHOLA get together to review the results of your plan?
So I kind of hinted at the beginning of the webinar that, our team was not meeting on a regular basis to talk about planning. It was all about fixing problems or maybe a bigger scale project that required some cross-functional teams. So, luckily we've been able to kind of take a different perspective and understand we need to change. So now we review the MBOs, which I referenced earlier. So those were for the company, certain departments, and then individuals. We review those quarterly. So that's kind of our biggest planning meeting. But we also have monthly all company meetings where we try and update the staff on where we are strategically and kind of the progress that we're making. But something else that we've done that's kind of unique for the family members in the business is we have an annual family meeting. So this would be our third one this year. So we just recently started doing this, but they're off-site. The whole family attends. So even those that aren't working in the business. So all my cousins and all the family,
great.
We get together and we update everyone on the strategy, where we're going, what's the future of the company. And it's a great way to get everybody together and force us to talk about the business, even with anyone that's not involved. So it's been great. It's had help with communication and getting everybody on the same page.
Wow, that's great. I like that you've got that consistent meeting rhythm for both family and non-family members. So that you, again, the more you communicate with people, the more they feel engaged.
Right.
And I've seen surveys that say that's the number one want of employees, is to feel engaged in the business and understanding what's going on. I would echo sort of the pattern that you guys have. In my experience, monthly meetings, if you're trying to figure out how often to get your management team together to review your plan results, that monthly rhythm is a good length of time to keep momentum, but not overwhelm the team, because people tend to complain about too many meetings. But I think going longer than a month, sometimes groups lose focus. And then I also encourage companies to do a quarterly, quote unquote, formal review of their plan, but so they can look and see what's changed in the external environment. Do they need to make any tweaks to the plan or pivot in any way? I do think, when you write a plan, you're not predicting the future for the next year.
Right.
Things change, so you need to kind of bake that into your process. Okay, so we made it through the review of all 5 questions you need to answer in your plan. And I know that simple isn't the same as easy. Planning is hard work. And hopefully you've captured some good ideas on your worksheet that you can take going forward as you work on your plan. We do know from research that a family business increases its odds of success when it has a written business plan, and written being the key word there. And a plan not only helps ensure the viability of the business, but perhaps more importantly, it protects the family relationships. Our goal today was to share an easy to understand framework so that hopefully this process of planning will be a bit less complicated and less intimidating. Sonia, it's been really great hearing about your family's real life experiences. And before we take questions from the audience, I'm curious to hear what you would say have been the biggest benefits for both your family and the company from this planning process.
Well, I would think, the best benefit that the planning process has really given us is it's forced us to step away from, those day-to-day tasks and challenges. And it's forced us to ask, the family and the leadership team, where do we want to be this year, 5 years, 10 years. It's created a lot of communication, and it's a forum for communication. So, getting everybody into that meeting rhythm and forcing everyone to really sit and focus on this subject has been awesome. It's also created a lot of accountability. So, now we have a written plan we can reference and say, no, we're going off course if we take on this project.
Yeah, right.
We need to kind of pivot, like you said, and get back to, what are our goals and what did we really commit to? Because, we said earlier, it's so easy to say yes to everything. There's so much opportunity, for not only for our market, but for a lot of businesses. So being diligent in saying no and committing to the plan that we all created together, it's really created that accountability for us, which we desperately needed. So that's been a great benefit.
That's great. And you hit on it a couple times, and I think it really is so important that I think sometimes we think in business everybody should just get along, but it's okay to have conflict. It's okay to have that tension, and the planning process, especially for a family business, does sort of force those tough conversations. And we all know how that is when there's the unspoken, truth in the room, and it's better to get it out and talk it through and get everybody on the same page. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sonia, for sharing your story and the story of your family business with us today. It's been really great hearing your real life experience.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay. Well, now I would like to turn it over to Lori. And I know that you've been submitting questions throughout the webinar. I'm not sure that we'll be able to get to all of those, but Lori, why don't you tell us what question we're going to start with?
Yeah, so we have some great questions from the audience. So just pick one out of here and we get started. And Sonia and Jeannie will, as they've done, take both sides of a real life experience and a professional experience, plug and answer. So if we're ready, here we go.
Sounds
good. First question. So this is a great question. Who in a company should be involved in creating the business plan?
Okay, well, maybe I'll start with that one, and then I would love to hear from Sonia how they approached it. I would echo the fact that she and her family involved a lot of different stakeholders. And I think especially in the beginning of the planning process, diverse input is good. And managers can engage their team. So for example, the operations manager can do a special 2-hour meeting and maybe, as an example, go through the SWOT analysis with their team. And gather as much of those insights as they can. And I do think that when it actually gets down to creating the plan and writing the plan, it does need to be a smaller group. I just think logistically and so forth, it's hard. But if you've got a lot of diverse input going into the, what would usually be maybe a couple of half days off site, it enables the executive leadership team to have a broader perspective than just what they know and what they're exposed to. So how about you, Sonia? Who all has been involved in the process for you guys?
It was a pretty small group. Let me think. It was the four owners and then the executive team. So I think total it was about 7 people, which, it's still a small group, but you can still get some perspectives in. But, we needed that perspective from different people with different experiences.
That's great. Okay.
All right.
What's our next question, Lori?
All right. Checking the questions. All right. Here's one. Oh, I like this one. This is probably for Sonia, but she'll be ready. How has the planning process impacted your relationship with your family?
So like I stated earlier, it's really created a forum for communication and discussion about the business. So giving us, a real task in the meeting to really focus and say, this is what we need to talk about. And, Jeannie, you hinted on, you have to answer the tough questions, and creating a time and a place to do that and having everyone understand that this is the forum to do so. It also kind of takes that emotion out of it. So, family business, there's tons of emotion. It's part of who we are and what we do every day. So having, a strategic way to look at things can take out that emotion and make things be a little bit more strategic and make it easier to talk about those tough questions. So, a lot of the times you may have the discussion around the dinner table, and that's not always the best place to talk about it. So being offsite with a facilitator and a team, it creates a great opportunity to kind of share and discuss without all of the emotion that happens in family business. So, it's been great. I think it's, helped us stay focused and be a little bit more accountable too. So
that's great. And I'm just going to interject one other thing that I've seen in family businesses that is a huge benefit that comes out of the planning process. Especially, we hinted earlier about the whole thing of the roles that family members play in the business. And oftentimes a family member sort of inherits the open slot, even though it's not what they love and it's not what they're good at. So I have personally seen families benefit personally in their relationships because this planning process has helped to people get better aligned and moving them around in the organization to a role they're better suited for. And that's huge.
And it also forces them to really share their opinion.
Yeah.
If someone isn't sharing and, we want to understand what everyone's opinion is in the family, this creates that forum and that opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. We all want to be heard. Okay, Lori.
Thanks, ladies. We have time for a couple more. This is an interesting question. I'm going to summarize it and see where it takes us. So if you're on board as a non-family member and you have concerns over some of the family wanting that family legacy, like the whole is wanting to pass that down, and it's in their vision, it's in their mission, but you have other family members, especially we talked about as families get out generationally, that they're less connected to the business and that motion. So now you're sitting around the table. How can you decide? Some folks in the business might just want to sell it and get out and kind of cash out. And there's still on the other side maybe a lot of emotion. So any idea about trying to get everyone on the same page, or maybe there's a way for everyone to get what they want?
Yeah, well, I would be curious, Lori, to get your input on this question because you really are that person in a HOLA, right? You've got multiple generations and multiple family members. I guess without knowing the specifics of the situation, my biggest, point of reflection on that is the communication. It's really, everybody's got to, show up and be above board and have the strength of character to talk about what's really important to them, what their goals and desires are. And, quite often there's a way to have family members have an investment or a buy-in to the business without being there every day and having an active role. But boy, it sure can create a lot of tension if you've got family members working long hours in the business that aren't benefiting any more than the folks who are, viewing it from afar.
Yeah, so I think the way we've kind of looked at it, and I think what you're saying is you have to kind of take each person individually who has a weigh-in or has a, however you want to address that, deciding who has these powers of decision-making, and ask them individually, maybe an anonymous poll like we've done today, or maybe one-on-one with someone, an outside consultant like yourself, to really hear about those dynamics and really the reasons behind it. And a lot of it will then come out from there in terms of maybe needing some conflict resolution or mediation or further discussion. And then, as the board, hearing all that information can help assist really the topic or the thing that makes people uncomfortable is all the mushy stuff.
Right.
So making it unpersonal, which is hard in a personal business, helps to get everybody to be able to have discussions that aren't, painful or hurtful. So it is a task worth tackling, I think.
For sure. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's about the relationships. So.
Right. All right. We have time. We have one more question. Let's try this one. I like this one. How far should a plan look out? I mean, there used to be 5 years. Strategic plan was 5 years or even 25 years.
Right.
So clearly in
We're old.
In the day and age of planning or instant gratification maybe, what do you recommend? Because sometimes, like you said, there's no crystal ball. How do you manage that?
Yep. Well, I think that it's always good to look out on the very distant horizon. Sonia talked about sort of their 10-year view. And I don't think that's bad. I mean, if you think about that longer term planning horizon being more aspirational, and then as you get closer, to current day on that planning horizon, the details become more specific. So I think the key thing is, Lori, that as long as there's a process built into your planning process that you're always revisiting it and again tweaking it and pivoting, you know, that 3 years though generally is about what I see with companies. You know, we talked about those game-changing initiatives, and I always encourage companies, you know, look beyond just the next 6 months or 12 months, because you can do it all, but you can't do it all at once. And so, you know, that's the benefit of having a little bit longer planning horizon. You can shoot for world domination, but maybe not in the first 2 years.
I also like in those plans that you could, I kind of reference resetting your sails. So, you know, you're out there, your destination is the same, but, you know, if you're not getting wind in your sail, you know, you need to make an alternative shift.
That's
and
a great metaphor.
Shift. It's not, we have to redo the whole plan. I think a lot of people will then abort the plan. You know, we're never going to get there. It's never going to happen. So then you can realign those activities or processes or maybe metrics to still get you to that end result of world domination.
Yes.
That's what it is. But I think that's part of it. As you get through the plan, if people don't see, you know, then they think the plan is broken, and it may not be broken.
Right, that's right.
It's shifting.
Yeah, and I think just a key thought that you made there, I want to encourage everybody, if you're struggling in your plan, don't give up. You know, again, it's hard work. Even a simple process is hard.
Yeah, and keep up the communication.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts too?
No, I mean, I think the entire process has been great, and you know, like I stated, it's family businesses are charged with emotion. So, you know, to be able to create a process that can kind of remove some of that emotion and make it a little bit more strategic has been so helpful for us. And you know, it's the best benefit has been the communication and the accountability. So it's helped us tremendously, and if I could recommend it to anyone, I would. And you know, being a third generation family member coming in, I'm new to the business. Having this set up for me is just making me so much more confident and you know, proud to work here, and you know, we're really set up for success. So you know, I couldn't recommend it more, and it's just been a huge benefit to us.
Great.
Great.
That's great.
Well, listen, thank you, Sonia, Jeannie, and for myself and everyone listening. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to hear about this planning process. And clearly now your work begins.
Right.
This webinar and its contents, as well as the information about the Whole of Family Business EAP, is going to be sent to all registrants. Have a wonderful day.